Hi everybody, and welcome back to my channel where we look at members of my classic computer collection. Now, it's been a very long time between drinks since the last video. It was about 7 years ago, and there's been quite a hiatus. I've still got a couple of members of my collection I haven't done videos on though, and recently I remastered all of the videos I did in 2013, 2014, and I got quite a positive response to doing that, and it's given me the motivation just to finish off doing a couple more videos for the remaining members of my collection. And after that, I might even do a few more on various bits of hardware or perhaps concepts that have occurred. Anyway, this video involves a classic computer. It is the Atari 800. Now, I've done a couple of videos on Atari machines. I've done the 400 and I've done the 800 XL. Originally, I didn't think this was worth doing, the 800, because I'd done those other two. It was one that I obtained a little later after I'd finished most of those videos. So I wasn't going to bother. But I've decided, yes, it probably deserves its own place in the sun. And so we're going to cover it. So here it is. Atari had had great success with their video games machines and their video games console for the home, particularly the Atari 2600. However, in the late 1970s, they were watching the developing personal computer market carefully, and they noticed that there was a lot of interest in general-purpose microcomputers for the home. Using these microcomputers, people could not only play games, but could also write their own programs. They could process data and numbers and write documents. These 1977 releases seen here, the Apple II, Commodore PET and TRS-80 Model 1, were examples of such personal computers. It's possible Atari saw these personal computers as a threat to their game console market, particularly the Apple II, as the Apple II could do colour. However, they would have also seen an opportunity. And that opportunity was to expand their market beyond the video games area into general home computing. To this end, Atari came up with two what are now considered classic models, the Atari 800 and the Atari 400. Both machines had much the same architecture. Both were powered by a 6502 CPU with special chips for graphics. They had superior sound generation for the day, and both ran the same software, given adequate memory. The dedicated graphics chips provided sprites, and they helped the CPU out during gaming. The built-in sound hardware was also impressive, and these gaming features set these machines apart from their competitors. The 400 was the junior of the pack. It had only 16K of RAM at maximum, was less expandable, and had a membrane keyboard. Essentially, it was a games machine, but you could learn programming as well if you wished. Its big brother, the Atari 800, was for those that wanted serious home computing. Came with a full-stroke typewriter-style keyboard and an output which could be hooked up to a composite video monitor for nice, clear, sharp video. On release in 1979, both machines initially sold with only 8K of RAM, but pretty soon they were selling with their more typical configurations, which was 16K for the 400 and 48K for the 800. Here's a 1979 advertisement for the Atari 800. Features listed in the ad include the availability of cartridge-based software, 4 separate sound channels, a high-speed serial port for peripherals, 48K of RAM when maxed out, superior graphics, and lowercase built-in. And all of these features stacked up pretty well against competition of the day. The advertisement also extols the machine's potential for home management, for business, entertainment, and education. Okay, so that's how the Atari 800 was presented to the marketplace. So let's take a closer look at mine. One thing that struck me when I first took delivery of my Atari 800 was that it was smaller than I expected. Perhaps my experience with the Dick Smith System 80 and Exidy Sorcerer led me to expect a larger footprint with something that has a full-stroke keyboard, but the unit's quite compact, and I really like the design. There's a certain aesthetic that I'm sure Steve Jobs who was the co-founder of the chief competition, Apple, at the time, would have approved of. The Atari 800's sloping sides and its clean lines make it an attractive, minimalist unit. So let's have a look at the keyboard. It's your standard QWERTY keyboard, but with a series of special keys that you'd expect with a computer. Note the special Atari key in the lower row, second to the right. Some software use this, but not much. It was dropped in the next iteration of the computer, the Atari 800 XL. The 4 function keys to the right were often used to start programs or make selections in games. And you'll see there that the system reset button is semi-walled in. It's got a couple of plastic guards next to it. I assume that's to prevent it being depressed by accident when hitting the Option key. So we'll come down to peer underneath the keyboard and we can see 4 joystick ports. More than enough to carry a game night with friends. So just moving around the side, we can see the following from left to right. First, the monitor socket for a composite video monitor. The 400 model lacks this. It just has an RF modulator output. Next, there's a socket labeled peripherals. And this is the serial input-output, or SIO, computer bus. It allows peripherals to be connected and to be chained together from this bus. And these peripherals could include disk drives, or a cassette deck, a printer, or a modem, or a combination of all of those. Next to that is a channel selector switch for the built-in RF modulator. And finally, we have a power switch and a power socket. Interestingly, the external power supply delivers 9 volts of AC power into there, not DC. So there's obviously an AC-DC converter inside the machine. So if we just go around the back, here's a look at the back. There's nothing here except for a very long RF cord. A number of home computers of the day had these RF modulators built in and a very long cord because normally they would have been used with family television. So this was a very desirable thing to have. So you can see this flap here. If we pop this up, it reveals 2 cartridge slots. The left slot was the one mostly used for games, applications and languages. Unlike the later Atari 800 XL and 800 XE models, BASIC was not inbuilt for the Atari 800. It came on a cartridge. So if you want to use BASIC, therefore, you needed to plug the BASIC cartridge into the left-hand slot before the machine was turned on. You notice there's a right-hand slot here as well. That wasn't used very much at all. Very few cartridges used that slot. And in fact, in later variations of the 800, like the XL and the 800 XE, this right-hand slot was done away with altogether. So that's an external look at the Atari 800. The internals are interesting also. Both the 400 and the 800 were designed in an interesting way. The CPU, the RAM, and the graphics chips were all on internal cards which plugged into a backplane. Furthermore, in order to satisfy new FCC RF interference rulings to stop home computers wreaking havoc with nearby TVs and radios, all the circuitry was enclosed in an aluminium cage. Although this design was expensive to manufacture, it also made both models very sturdy. One other thing to mention about my machine before I show it working. It came as an NTSC machine from the US. Now here in New Zealand we use PAL as our colour TV standard. Originally then the colours and text from this machine didn't look too good. However, I found a modern video mod called the UAV Video Upgrade Board, which claimed to solve this problem. I installed it and it worked a treat, making the resultant video clean and crisp. I'll put a link to my blog write-up on the mod in the description text. Okay, time to fire up the machine and play some classic games. Right, we're going to start with Galaxians, and here it is. This is an arcade favourite, this one, and it's one I certainly enjoy playing. Quite challenging, and it's a lot of fun, and it is real old school. Then we have another one. This is Centipede again. All of these Atari games I've got are pretty old school, and they would have been available in the original arcades, of course. Always quite fun. This is one of my favourites. This is Pac-Man. Nice and colourful. Again, an arcade favourite where you run around, eat the Powerballs, and chase the ghosts. Score points. It's nice to play these again. Get the joystick out and give them a blast. This is Space Invaders. Rather strange version of Space Invaders, because normally you'd get shields that you can hide your gun behind, and you would peep out from these shields and you'd shoot the invaders, and the invaders would shoot your shields and gradually degrade them. But this version doesn't have any shields at all, so you're quite exposed, and it's a fairly challenging game. Whoops. Now this is Atari Writer. This is a word processor for the Atari 800. And it's one of the packages you might have used for home correspondence. Probably wouldn't cut it in business. It's only 40 columns across, but it's cartridge based, this one. And it's a decent piece of software if you've got a printer and you say want to write letters or do the odd bit of correspondence. I'm sure it was useful. Now I mentioned the fact that the Atari 800 doesn't have BASIC built in, but you've got to insert a cartridge in order to have BASIC, and this is the cartridge that I've got. So if you put that in the left-hand slot and you boot your machine up, you get Atari BASIC. It's not Microsoft BASIC, it is Atari BASIC, and they had to write their own, but it contains very similar commands to Microsoft BASIC. Now if you don't have any cartridges in at all, those two slots are empty, and you've got nothing else connected, this is what the Atari boots up with. It's called MemoPad, and it's really just a very simple program which allows you to type letters on the video. Just before I leave the Atari 800, I just want to show you one other piece of modern hardware I've got for it. This is an SIO2SD device from Lotharex Lair. I think that's how you pronounce it. It's a replacement for a disk drive, and it loads the programs off an SD card. It's brilliant. I've got hundreds and hundreds of programs on disk images on the SD card you can see poking out of the device there. The games can be loaded with just a few joystick selections and or key presses. It's really magic, and it does away with the need for any sort of floppy disks or disk drive. I like to write these things up when I get them, so I've got a blog post on my experiences with the SIO2 SD device. I'll add a link to that blog post in the description of the video. Now there is a loader that fires up when you turn on the machine with this SIO2 SD device attached, and it comes up and it shows you all of the disk images that are on the SD card. So you can see them there. There's quite a few of them. It's a matter of going up and selecting the one that you want to load. We will load number 2, and when you do that you get a menu of all of the games on that particular disk image. So let's select one of those to have a look at. Just loading in, and you can see me there with my mobile phone, using it as a camera, recording the screen video. So after a moment we've got our game, and this particular one's called Drop Zone. I haven't played this game before, so it's going to be interesting to see how this goes. Looks like a good game though. You've got to fire at these little craft, aliens or enemies that are floating around you, and try to get them before they get you. Oops. Yeah, not an easy game to play, but I'm sure I'll get better at it. Very fast. You can move in both directions and you can move up and down. Well, I'm getting a few of them now. This is more like it. Yeah, so it looks like a fun game. Oops. So that's the end of me. Now this picture shows the software cartridges that I have. There's one missing there, and that is Centipede, which is actually in the machine at the moment. But those are the other 5, and you've seen them all working. Very handy to have cartridges. Of course, you get instant loading, and I can see why they were so popular in the day. Now here's another interesting item. This is the manual for Galaxian. So this came with the cartridge, and I'm really impressed with the quality of this game's manual. It's multi-paged. It's got glossy photographs and diagrams and pictures. It explains what's behind the game, how to play it, scoring, strategy. It is so much better than what normally used to come with games, which was simply a scrappy bit of paper. Now, as far as manuals are concerned, I've only got 2 for the 800. There's this one on BASIC. This is one of the more popular books that was sold with the Atari 800 or 400 if you wanted a book on BASIC. Quite comprehensive, good reference manual as well as tutorial aspects. It showed you how to program an Atari BASIC. So I'll just flick through the pages here and you can see some of the chapters that are in the book. Here's the odd diagram. It certainly has lots of examples. Tries to explain programming concepts as you go through it. And it would have been a handy reference manual for both the 800 and the 400 in its day. How to get started. A little bit about the machines themselves. The beginning here. And an index in the front. So that's one book. The other book is a manual on how to use both of the machines. So it doesn't focus just on BASIC itself, but looks more widely at what you can do with your computer. That's pretty good. Let me just flick through that for you. You can see what's in the book. So some diagrams there. Covers graphics, how to use the sprites. How to program sound routines. And like most books, it gives examples as it goes along. So it's another handy reference book for the Atari 800. So I'll close this video up with some thoughts on the Atari 800. When I view this computer in the context of 1979, knowing what other computers were around in the personal computer market at the time, like the TRS-80 Model 1, Commodore PET, the Apple II, the Texas Instruments TI-99, 4, and Exidy Sorcerer, I've got to say I'm impressed. The Atari 800's got most of what you would want in a personal computer for home at that time. If it has a deficiency, it would be that 40-column text display, which limits its use for serious business purposes. It's just not enough screen real estate, even though some applications allow for horizontal scrolling. For game playing and other things, though, it was awesome. However, time moved quickly in technology terms those days, and as the decade rolled over into the 1980s, the much cheaper Commodore VIC-20 was introduced into the market. Sure, it was less capable, but it could play those arcade games. And then we had the upgraded Texas Instrument model, the TI-99 4A, released in 1981. It had a full-stroke keyboard, also had sprites. So Atari's advantages over the PAC were quickly becoming somewhat eroded. If we move forward to the Commodore 64's arrival in 1982, then the competitive advantages the Atari 800 had in the home market were all but lost. Now, price wars were a common thing in the early 1980s, but both the Atari 400 and 800 struggled to compete on price with the newcomers, and you can see why when you look at the design. With its aluminium RF cage and its backplane and card approach, these machines were expensive to make. And this left room at the low end of the home market, which was filled up with the likes of the Sinclair Spectrums, the Commodore VIC-20, and soon after that the Commodore 64, and a lot of other models. I know here in New Zealand the original Atari models were never a force, mostly because they were hugely expensive, and they remained so all through the early 1980s, even when the prices for other home computers were dropping. Atari kept its 8-bit technology alive by introducing the XL series, which were much cheaper to produce, but they didn't really introduce anything much above the original Atari 800, apart from at the margins. By that time too, sprites and sophisticated 8-bit audio were no longer unique, and you had a plethora of cheap and cheerful home computers pouring into a crowded market. So the last hurrah of the original Atari 800 was the Atari XE range, introduced under Jack Tramiel in 1985. And in 1992, Atari dropped support for its whole 8-bit range, and the line started by the Atari 800 and 400 came to an end. Still, every classic computer has a limited life cycle, and in 1979, the Atari 800 was innovative and it was special. It's a computer that has a proud place in personal computing history. Well, I hope you enjoyed that look at the Atari 800. Now, as I said, I've got one more machine to cover, so I'll be doing that in the next few weeks. It might not be until after the new year, but I certainly intend to get it done. And then I may do a few more videos, perhaps on other unusual pieces of hardware that I've come across that I know well, or maybe some classic computing concepts. We'll see. Anyway, until the next video, keep well, and we'll see you then.